Okay, check, check. Am I on? Can everybody hear me? All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. This is my 100th time I've come to NDC London. So clearly you all like my stories and you keep inviting me back. So that's pretty great. That means a lot. I like you all. The last time I was here, there was a bomb threat. I was actually standing right here, just about right here, when all of the alarms start going off and military police rush us off down the stairwell and outside. Here I am, I'm still mic'd up, my laptop's still on the stage, rush downstairs thinking it's just a fire drill or whatever, but no, it's not just a fire drill because there's big guys with guns downstairs and they're pushing us farther and farther away. It turns out there's a bomb threat against Parliament and they're getting us out of the area. And so we go blocks and blocks and blocks away. And eventually we end up at right down at the pub. It was all very exciting for me. But all you fine local English people were so very cool about it. We just wandered down to the pub for a beer, and despite that sudden influx, that rush of customers they had, the bartenders were all kind of quite annoyed by it. They're like, oh, this is annoying. And I asked them, well, what do you think about it? And they're just like, this is just another day in Westminster. Everybody was cool, we just chatted and waited for the day to continue. It was a very British experience. I felt like I was right at home. So let's hope that doesn't happen again today. But if it does, I can tell you way juicier stories down at the pub than I can on stage. So in this talk today, success on your terms makes me a little uncomfortable. It's a different kind of talk than what I've normally done. It's uncomfortable because it's full of some personal stories to show off some painful times, some vulnerability that I don't normally talk about. But I've had a lot of people come and ask me about these sort of things, ask advice of me. So I thought it would be valuable to put some serious thought into this and put together some stories about my career, how I defined, how I achieved success. I've been super lucky. I've gotten to do a lot of different things over my career. I've been a developer at a big company. I've been a developer at a small company. I've been a freelancer. I've been a consultant. I founded companies. I've been the CEO. I've gotten to produce comedy shows. I've gotten to do lots of different stuff. And that's pretty awesome. But I learned a lot, sometimes with a lot of pain, about how to be successful at what I was doing. And that's what we're going to talk about today. I just want to call attention to the rule of 2 feet, which is a rule that I love about conferences. If this is not the talk you thought it was, if you're not getting anything out of it, this time is for you. So feel free to stand up and use your 2 feet to go to one of the other talks that you'll get more out of. I promise that I'm only going to cry a little bit about it later. So let's start with, what does success mean to you? Because this whole talk is about professional success. But it doesn't mean the same thing to everybody. It doesn't necessarily mean the same thing to me as it does to you, and it doesn't mean the same thing forever. Success could mean money, time, prestige, notoriety, power or influence, or other things. There's no judgment from me at all about what you want, whatever makes you happy. But the first step in getting any of it is deciding what you want. If you don't define what you're trying to get, you're going to find yourself aimless, just kind of punching the clock, doing your thing. Kind of like I did. My first job out of college was I worked as a developer for a company that made giant spinning knives. It actually made lawnmowers, but that is super boring. So I say we made giant spinning knives. So I worked for Toro, which I think is here in the UK too, but I think we're called Hater, or they were called Hater here. I don't know if that's a thing. Same company. I worked for Toro for 7 years, and it was comfortable. It was easy. I didn't make a lot of money, but I made enough. I put in my 40 hours. I went home. I didn't have any real plans for my future or an idea of what success would look like. Then one day, I got into a car accident, a pretty bad one. The seatbelt had grabbed a hold of me and punctured my intestines. They were worried I was bleeding internally. I was rushed off to surgery, and I almost died. And it's amazing how fast everything can change in one of those moments. It had been months, years of me doing just kind of the same thing, the same work with the same people. There wasn't really anything pushing me to get better. I was okay. Then bang, I was in the hospital for 2 weeks. I was in critical care for 2 weeks, which there's some crazy stories about the kind of people who end up in critical care. That's stories for the bar. But stories about like why people would end up there, where I was just had a front row seat to watch what was going on. But I remember lying there in the hospital bed, regretting how little I had done with my life. That if I had died that day, I would be a mid-level employee at a lawnmower manufacturer. I would be replaced in a few weeks. I always felt like there would be more time, another day, another week, another year. Which brings me to the first kind of lesson that I want to share with you, and why all of this is important. You don't have as much time as you think you do. You don't know when this thing that we're doing ends. This car accident, this was one of the most significant experiences of my life, and I would never wish it on any of you. But it did light a fire in me about what I wanted to do. That today could be your last day, so you have to take advantage of every opportunity when you can. This is when I put my first thought into what success would look like for me. And I decided that I wanted to work on something important, something that meant something. I wanted to work on things that people knew about, so that if all ended tomorrow, I would leave behind work that I was proud of. And so that was my first definition. And my first of 6 stories that I'm going to tell you today that kind of illustrate a phase of my career and one really important lesson that I think everybody could take away from it. This story was what showed me how to actually give a crap about my own future and decide what I wanted to do. And I think all of you are ahead of me there already, because you're here at a conference. At that point in my time, I'd never been to a software conference. I'd never gone to a talk like this. I'd never done any of that. So you're already ahead. So I wanted to work on something important, but I didn't have the confidence to do it yet. There was a lot of engineers and leaders around me that I looked up to and that were building cool projects or influential at big companies, creating their own thing, but I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't think I could. I didn't know what I needed, but I know I was missing something. I had tons of imposter syndrome about, I don't know how to do that. I can't do that. I'm not good enough for that. I thought I wasn't ready yet. I needed to learn something else, stuff about business or something. So my wife and several other people that I had looked up to had gone back to school and gotten their MBA. And that seemed like a good idea. Grad school would give me the credibility to work on important things and hopefully teach me not to screw it up. I enrolled in a grad school program called the Management of Technology. It's a lot like an MBA, but with an engineering focus. I generated this slide here. I gave AI a prompt that says, generate me a smart-ass looking MBA consultant. And I got this picture that kind of looks like Hannes. I'm not sure what that means. I met some really, really smart people in grad school. I also met some of the dumbest people that I've ever met in grad school. And some of them were the teachers. I had a marketing professor who was a real-life VP of marketing at a company that you have all heard of. And he didn't know how social media worked. I had a professor who sat on dozens of boards of big companies, and every single one of his presentations looked like this. 5 different fonts and 5 different colors, every slide a different format with different colors. It was crazy. You couldn't pay attention to anything. It was just all over the place. It was nuts. And I had an ongoing argument for a whole semester with my IT professor, who kept telling us that agile projects all eventually failed, and that any serious company followed a strict software development lifecycle process. I am not entirely sure that that guy ever got a job outside of academia. But I did learn a bunch of useful things. I learned how to make accounting reports and how to read between the lines on financial statements and product development and marketing and that sort of thing. But the real thing I learned, the thing I spent $70,000 to really get out of the whole thing, is that everybody's just making this up as they go. Big, important people doing important things, they're just making it up too. They just have the confidence behind them. I wasn't any lesser than the engineers and leaders that I had looked up to. I didn't need permission to start doing the things or try out to do the things I wanted to do. And just because I didn't know how to do it now doesn't mean you can't start and figure it out as you go. There, look, I saved you all $70,000. More, tuition has gone up a lot since then. You're welcome. That's my second story. Hopefully showing you that there's a lot of really dumb people that do big, important things. You can do big, important things too. So it was 2010. I had recovered from my car accident, and I had this $70,000 piece of paper saying that I was qualified to do important work. Now what? I looked around for jobs, because that's still what you do, but all the work seemed boring. It was the same thing. It was the same grind at a different company with a different logo on the wall. But it was all the same. And that's when I met this guy. Nicky Wickett. Does anybody know who Nicky Wickett is? Nicky Wickett was the guitarist in a band called Slave Raider. They were a metal band in Minneapolis in the 80s. And they were pretty popular. Of course, when I met him, he looked like this. And he went by the name David Hussman. He had hung up his guitar and joined software, and he's one of the few actual rock star developers that I have ever met. So even though he wasn't in a band anymore when I met him, he was still very cool. He was one of the coolest people I'd ever met. He could roll into the C-suite in a big company wearing shorts and sandals and get the executives to call him the dude. And it would work with them to just remove the stupid things that their company was doing to get in the way, that they were getting in their own way of building awesome software. He would use these simple, funny, brilliant constructs like Dude's Law, that the value of what you're doing is just Y over how. And you could get more out of whatever you're doing either by making the Y bigger or making the how smaller. And it's simple and obvious, but he could talk for an hour about this. This is his whole presentation would be this slide. And he would talk for an hour, and everybody would be riveted. It would be amazing. If you're looking for more stuff, go look up David Hussman on YouTube. There's a bunch of his talks. So David showed me there was a different kind of career success. There was more options than just working for a different company. He had a different kind of success. He had independence, which is something I had never really thought of. He was his own person. He followed his own rules, and he had his own dress code. He didn't work for one company. He worked for himself, and he helped lots of different companies do great things as a consultant. He shifted my idea of what I thought success was, and I wanted independence. I wanted to be like David. I wanted to do the cool projects, cool, important things, but without all that corporate BS. David introduced me to this world of staff augmentation. Is that a word here? I don't know if that translates. This is a really boring word. David didn't call it this. He called it embedded agile coaching because he was cool and wanted to invent his own words. He saw this role of entering a company to help them to work alongside as their team as a coach. You would help them play the game of software development better. And he wanted me to be one of his coaches. So how does this work? So some company wants to actually be cool, and they have this ambitious software project that they want to go out and do. Some greenfield thing, they're going to go after a new market or a new product or something cool. But they don't have enough people, enough employees to do that work. But they have a great big capital budget to get this thing done. So they go out to a consulting firm. Again, David was cool. He didn't call himself a consulting firm. He called himself an agile dojo. And he was just cool enough to pull that off. If I'm saying that and you're all kind of collectively rolling your eyes, but he would tell you that and you'd just be like, Yeah. He just bought in on it. He didn't have any employees. He had subcontractors, other independent people that had their own company of one, so that he would place in to that company to pull that off. And he would call those coaches. And he wanted me to be one of those coaches. He wanted me to start my own company, go in through his consulting firm to a company that had reached out to him for help. This was what I thought I wanted. But it was scary. Doing this would be a big leap. It would mean I'm walking away from a solid, dependable salary, a paycheck that had been my foundation for a really long time. And I had to start my own company. I had to figure out how to invoice people. I had to figure out how to get insurance and save for retirement and get health insurance and handle vacation and all of those things on my own. I had a client. I had a client lined up. David had given me a client. But what if they hated me? What if I sucked at my job? What if, when that contract ended, I couldn't get another one? Was this a reliable way of doing work? I thought I'd end up on the street, developer code for food. The scariest part of it was, how do you manage cash flow? I would have to invoice clients for work, but that's a really slow process. I was going to be without a paycheck for 12 weeks between the last time I got paid from my regular job and the first time one of my invoices got paid. And that's a long time. It was going to be financially tight for us. Especially so that I had a mortgage, car payments, and we had just had our second child, who looks just like me. I actually had to take out a loan from my retirement account, which involves quite a bit of accounting trickery to cash flow myself during this time, which made it extra stressful because I would have these really big penalties that I have to pay the government if I couldn't pay that back. My wife and I joked that we would have to go live in my parents' basement if this whole thing blew up. But she still told me to go do it. Because we remembered, everyone's just making this up as they go. We can too. I could do this. This is what I was shooting for. This was independence. This was money. This was prestige. This was everything I wanted. So I went for it. And we stuck the landing. The client loved me. When my 6-month contract ended, they wanted to extend me, so I raised my rates. Raise your rates. I worked on that project for 18 months before deciding to move on to other things of my own choice. And honestly, I never was without a client during the 6 years that I was a consultant. There was always somebody else. I never had more than a day where I didn't have an active contract. On that first one, I worked with some of the best engineers that I had ever worked with. People who astonished me with their creative solutions. There were some really hard technical challenges on that project. But the hardest part of that project, the hardest part of every single project that I worked with, was building relationships, talking to people, communicating with other people, building teams, getting people to trust you. Because I can't do the work by myself. I can't decide what we need to build. I don't know all the problems, but we can, as a group, as a team, as a company together. And the key to being really successful as a consultant, as an employee, as anything you do, is to make yourself indispensable through building these relationships. Not by holding on to arcane knowledge, that you're the only one who knows how this module works, but by being the connector of that company, that you know everyone, you know who has the answer to every question. Your ability and your willingness to build relationships up and down the org chart, or with other professionals in the industry, is way more influential to your success than whether or not you know the latest JavaScript framework. Relationships got me that job. It got me the respect of David Hussman to trust me with one of his biggest clients. Building relationships and teams kept me that job, and it's why I excelled at consulting. Whenever I would start a new client, I would always spend the first 6 weeks just crushing it with them. Spent way more time than I billed them for. And I spent it learning about how their code worked, how their system worked, and how their people and political structures in that company worked. So that I knew who to ask, and people knew who I was and what I was doing and what we were trying to accomplish together. And that always was the differentiating factor that kept me around. I saw this tweet a while ago from my friend April, and I felt like this perfectly captured the moment that she learned this truth. At this point, I'm convinced the best thing you can do to develop yourself in your career as a staff security engineer isn't learning technology, but building back-channel relationships with other security engineers. I think she was trying to be like snarky about it, like that's not what you should do, but like everybody was like, yeah. Yep, that's what you should do. You should know all the other people and they should know you. If you're thinking about what do you need to do to get better, always prioritize those communication skills, those team building skills over tech skills. I know building tech skills is fun, but it's the other thing that's going to be the real differentiator. Consulting was great. I got a lot of prestigious projects that I wanted to work on, and I was really proud of the things I built. I also made pretty good money, more than double what I made as an employee. But what I didn't have was any time. Fundamentally, I was trading my time for money. I give an hour to you, you give me some dollars. If I want to keep my hours, I don't make any money. I wanted to keep the hours and keep my money. How do I do that? After several years of consulting, the definition of success for me had really shifted into controlling more of my time. I didn't want to work 40 hours. At least I didn't want to work that every time because somebody else told me to. I wanted to choose to travel or come to a conference or take time off, or choose, because I'm really excited about something, to work 60 or 80 hours that week, regardless of the client's budget, because I was excited about it, and I wanted to exercise that energy. Prestige was part of my idea still. I still wanted to work on something important, and money is important. It might sound crass, might sound lame, but it is, because money enables you to control your time. I'm not talking about like tech overlord money here. I'm talking about guacamole money. There's this restaurant I live called Chipotle. Do you have Chipotle here? Yeah, we do. All right, cool. So you know Chipotle. So Chipotle, I love Chipotle. It's great burritos. But they charge extra if you want guac on it, right? I never wanted to worry about getting the extra guacamole. I can always get the guacamole. I don't have to think about it. That's not a thing that I need to do. That's what I wanted. I wanted just that safety net, that security level. Great, Todd. How do we do that? What's the path to that? If you're not going to sell your time, you have to sell something else. And so I tried a lot of different ideas, a lot of different things to sell. I built blogs that I tried to sell advertising on. I built community sites. I tried to build product sites. I tried to build training. I tried lots of things. And I'd build these like little proof of concepts or whatever for these different products. But a mistake that I made over and over and over again was over-engineering. We've all done this. You decide one day in a fit of inspiration that you're going to start a blog. What's the first thing you do? I got to write my own blogging engine. Clearly none of them available or suited to my unique needs, so let's start with that. Clearly none of them will work for you. And no, that's wrong. You use GitHub Pages, or use Ghost, or use Medium, or use WordPress, or Pug, or whatever. You don't write that yourself. The risks of over-engineering applies to anything you're building as a developer, because we're all really guilty of it. We all have this tendency to do it because building is fun. We want to exercise these things. Talking to customers or doing marketing or supporting a user, that's hard and uncomfortable. I just want to build more features. We find lots of reasons to over-engineer. And I think this is especially hard if you have a history as a corporate developer. And I think that's because there's a lot of different risks in that world. If you're a corporate developer, this is your job. If this looks kind of like you, I don't know if this looks like anybody.
Like you.
Or, yeah, this is me. A long time ago, but thinner, and I don't know. So you're working at a company, and that company has taken all of the product risk out of what you're doing. You, as a developer, do not care if the customers like it or if the product succeeds. You care, is the feature done on time? Is it fast enough? Is it tested? Is it done in a responsible way that won't create a bunch of more work for you or your team down the road? And that's just about what every software quality talk at every conference is about addressing the risks you have as a corporate developer. Because it'll be harder to fix it later, they say, right? That's the excuse we use to do all of these other things. Or it'll never get fixed at all. You got to make it the way you want. But if you're building a product yourself, these are not your biggest risks. Not even close. Even if you're trying to solve a technologically challenging problem, the risks you have as an independent product developer is, are you building something that solves a problem important enough for anyone to pay for? That's it. That's your risk. Nothing else really matters. Until you solve that, timely performance, separation of concerns, testing, none of those things are important until you solve, am I building something that anybody cares enough about to pay for? All those other things are important, but only once the first problem is solved. Otherwise, you're over-engineering it. Which leads to this really common bit of startup wisdom. If you're not embarrassed of it, you waited way too long to ship the product. You got to get it out there and get it in front of other people because you don't know if it's any good. You don't know if you've built something that anybody cares about. Don't spend a bunch of time making sure it performs super fast or it's 100% test code coverage or anything else that you were taught in a corporate world. Get it out there and see if anybody cares. It's really hard to get around, especially if you spent a lot of time working on big teams. Everything in your old life will scream at you in your head that this is wrong, this is dirty code, this is unprofessional. But that first time that you just hack something together, a one file procedural code, no tests, and ship it to see if they like it, and you're okay with it, like you're really just okay with it, that's when you're ready to build your own products. Now, once you've addressed that risk, and you've shipped something, and people like it, now you've built a weird monolith with shaky foundations that is not good at all. And now you have to fix it. Now you have to do all of those good code quality things that you wanted to do initially because you have all of those same risks again. And some people will be here like, I told you, it'll be harder to fix it later. You know what? They're right. It is going to be harder to fix it later. But there might have been 5 or 10 or 50 or 100 little prototypes that you built that were wrong, that nobody cared about, that were just garbage, that nobody ever used. And if you spend for every single one of those, you polish it and test it and get all those things done, then you're not going to get through that iteration fast enough to find what matters. You've wasted a lot of time polishing turds. It's a lot harder to throw away code if you feel like you've spent a lot of time optimizing it. So over-engineering. This is the most common problem I see when anybody wants to strike out on their own. Whether you're trying to start your freelancing job, start as a consultant, build your own product, do your own training, whatever, spending way too much time on minutia of the website or getting the training UI to look just right or whatever, and not nearly enough time on building the content and marketing it to your customers. The first project of mine that wasn't a turd and deserved to be polished was TrackJS. TrackJS is a JavaScript error monitoring service. I had this idea based on this common problem that I was solving while I was doing consulting, is that lots of companies were building JavaScript apps, and like all software, it broke a lot. But there wasn't really any good tooling to understand the errors in that ecosystem because it was all happening out in the browser. It wasn't happening in a server or a data center or a cloud that we controlled. It was all happening somewhere else. And I had this idea for TrackJS back in 2013, but I knew it was too big for me to just do this by myself. There was way too many moving parts of it. And so I leveraged a bunch of relationships that I had built while consulting. I'd known a lot of people in that industry who were also interested in making that leap to products, to controlling more of their time. So I built this small team of other people to help me with this. And I gave us a little deadline. I reached out to the organizers of my local JavaScript user group, and I said, hey, when's your next meeting? 5 weeks? Great. Put me on the schedule. I'm going to do a demo of my new product. They're like, all right, Todd. No code has been written yet, but I gave us a deadline. 5 weeks to get something done. That was going to stop us from over-engineering it. We had to get something done. And we did it. We built something. We were hacking nights and weekends. Now, none of us were full-time. We all had consulting jobs to look after, but we got it done. We built something. The code was awful. The UI was okay, but pretty simple. A lot of just square boxes and plain fonts and stuff like that. But it worked. It could capture an error and send it back in Chrome for this one kind of error. But it worked. That one thing worked. If you're not embarrassed of it, you waited too long to ship. We were very embarrassed of this product, but we got it out there. I gave the demo, and there were a lot of questions, a lot of excitement. But most importantly, two people, influential people at companies who were in the crowd, said, I want to use this now. How do I sign up? Let's do this. And I'm like, shit, this doesn't actually work. But it was a hugely positive signal. We pushed on this for another 3 months, still nights and weekends kind of on the side, but to get it to that first kind of usable version. There was still a lot of warts. It was still not at all clean code, but it worked enough that other people could use it in a more production sense. And users loved it. TrackJS grew up over those first few years. We realized how important it was to talk about the things we were doing, not just build. That was probably the pivotal moment in our success as a company, is when I stopped spending all of my time writing code and instead started blogging and tweeting and recording videos and coming to conferences and saying, hey, I can fix JavaScript for you and that sort of stuff, because talking to people is the only way they're actually going to find out about you. We learned how to sell, we learned how to market, we learned how to differentiate ourselves versus the much bigger players that we were competing with. And it evolved into something really cool. This little library that goes into your application and tracks what you're doing and collects errors and unhandled situations and all kinds of things. And it takes those errors and sends them back to me, where I draw these simple to the point UIs targeted at developers and say, hey, there's an error right there. You should look into that. Your error spiked way up. Gives you a good idea of how things go and how to fix them. The big unique thing that we did was combine analytics concepts with error monitoring. We called this the telemetry timeline. And it was included all the things the users did, the things that got added to console and network calls and stuff like that, so that you could tell a story about an error happened. And one of the things I'm actually most proud of is we were the first company that did this, the first one. And in the 10 years we've been operating, every single one of them has copied it. If this looks like, oh, that's just like breadcrumbs in New Relic or whatever. Yeah, they stole it from us. 6 years after we built it. It went to us, to the other startups in the area, all copied it, and then went from the other startups in the era that we grew up that copied it to the big companies. But we started it, and I feel, even though everybody copied it, it was our idea. We changed the monitoring market forever. I feel super proud of that. So over the first 3 to 4 years, it totally transformed into a product that didn't look like I built it in my basement. It looked like something real. It looked like a company. It didn't look like jackass Todd just built this thing together. I would show up at conferences and be like, oh, that guy works at TrackJS. Not only that guy is TrackJS. But it was a lot of work. It was a lot of work. There's this quote that's really common in software founder circles for people who start their own companies, is that we do it so that we get to choose which 80 hours per week we want to work. And that's not at all unfounded. I worked a lot of hours in those early years. There were a lot of weeks where I put 40 hours into consulting and then another 40 hours into TrackJS. And it was exhausting. And that's when all this gray hair started. And honestly, there were some pretty dark days. I was giving everything I had to get this thing to work. And when you're building something, your ego gets tied up in that thing you were doing. I was TrackJS. Saying something about the product was saying something about me. And that's not at all healthy. Because we would land some big customer on a Monday, and I would be elated. It would be the best day ever. I was on the top of the world. And then on Tuesday, somebody would say something mean about me on Twitter. And I'd be literally in tears. It would be the worst. It was manic. It completely destroyed me. There were a lot of days I wanted to quit. Honestly, I did quit. Several times I quit and said I didn't want to do this thing anymore. I had checked out. I'd stopped working on it. But I always came back to keep going because of two really important people. First, Erin. Erin is my wife. She's been a champion of it since we first had this idea. She was so smart and ambitious. She saw it, and she's like, that is amazing. You should go do that. That could change our life. And she's been there for all of it. She's helped me figure out marketing and content and work out deals. She's done so much. But most importantly, she didn't let me quit. When things got too much, when I was overwhelmed by it, she helped me through it. Eric is my work wife, kind of. He's been my partner since the beginning of TrackJS. He's the CTO. He built a lot of what the product actually does. My job he doesn't let me touch very much code anymore. But I've never met anybody who can take a concept to code faster than Eric can. He's like orders of magnitude faster. I'll pitch him an idea that I think is maybe not even workable, and 2 hours later, he has a demo for me. It's just amazing. But he's also a leader. And so when I would burn out, when I couldn't handle things, he would step in. He'd pull me aside, and he'd be like, go take a week off, go do something else, I'll run it. And he would step in for me. He would pretend to be me for a week so that things could keep going. And I did the same for him when I could, because we burned ourselves out a lot. We had this saying with each other. It's a marathon, not a sprint. We would be running really fast at something. We were trying to make this thing work, and we would burn ourselves out constantly. We needed energy to continue and push this forward. That was the thing that was going to make us win. We were competing with way bigger, way better funded companies. But we tell ourselves everyone else is going to flame out when the VC cash runs dry. We just need to outlast them. And I think that was true. Which leads me to this lesson, is you shouldn't do it alone. I can't imagine starting a company by yourself. It would be too hard, and you're going to quit. And you need somebody that when you quit can pull you back and keep it running while you're away. You need that support network both at home and at work so that if you want to have anything in your life other than the company that you're trying to start, somebody to support that for you and to care about what you're doing so that when you burn out and quit, you have somebody to help you through it. You shouldn't do it alone. Having good, smart people by your side will make sure that something actually works. So by 2020, I had achieved what I thought success was. I controlled my time. I controlled my independence. I felt prestige on what I was working on. Thousands of developers around the world were using this thing that I made. And I had some of that guacamole money in my pocket. And I was like, all right. But I had this nagging feeling that, did I just get lucky with this? Did I just, time the market out and I just rode a wave and I don't actually know anything? Could I do it again? Despite all of the pain, all of the stress, all of the anxiety of building something, I wanted to do it again. So I looked around for a problem that I could work on. And this word has been all over the place as this hot industry buzzword for a few years, observability. your ability to understand how well your production system is running. Everybody's talking about it. There's people here that have been talking about it. But they're all very focused on the cloud, on Kubernetes, on server stuff. There was very little talk about end user experience and how it would plug into it. And to me, somebody who has always cared very much about end user experience first, that seemed like a real miss. Maybe an opportunity. There's so many facets of client-side monitoring tech that could be part of that observability story. And so I started building a way to do some of that. And we built a product called Request Metrics. And it was going to be the first real client-side observability tool. We were going to look at the APIs your system had, but how the end users called them. Like, we were going to see how fast was it for the end user and what API or what status codes got returned. And then we were going to combine that with analytics events, like what the user was doing that triggered it, and what errors happened in the client-side code. But more than that, like, where did that user come from? Like, what channel did you acquire them via, and what were they trying to do on the site? Integrating marketing analytics data. And then security, too. What vendors did you trust to run that code that was part of that interaction? What domains received data? We built all of that. It worked. It was, honestly, I thought it was cool as hell. But it was huge, it was ambitious, and it was a mistake. The biggest mistake was that I didn't actually talk to anybody who used monitoring software about it. I didn't have conversations with DevOps engineers or people specializing in observability about what they would want to see about the client or what they cared about. I didn't talk to front-end engineers about the gaps they saw in the monitoring tools they had. I just kind of assumed I knew because I was an engineer, I did those things, and I cared about it. So I thought I was just going to build for me. But it turns out most DevOps people don't give a crap about the client side. It's just not their scope of responsibility. They think it's interesting, but if it comes down to actually making changes to their stack or getting a budget to like acquire new tools, there's just nothing there. And on the front end, I was building things that spanned way too many different roles. Like, it turns out marketing people really like their analytics tools that they had. And front-end engineers are pretty satisfied with their options for error monitoring. And security folks have a bunch of auditing tools that they're comfortable with. I was trying to build something for all of these people and failing at it, frankly. I was trying to do everything, so I wasn't really competitive at anything. And compiling that problem, I was using a word that these people don't understand. If I say observability to this guy, his eyes glaze over. He doesn't know what that means. I spent a lot of time, a lot of energy, and a lot of money trying to create something that was never going to work. And it's because I made a very, very rookie mistake. I didn't build products that solved a real problem. The things that I was solving were problems that didn't exist. No real person with a real budget out in the real world cared about this thing. At least not yet. I'd been overly confident that I understood what people wanted when I needed to spend time instead talking to people and listening. You could also say that I failed to follow this lesson, that I'd built a ton of capability into this new client-side observability platform that we probably shouldn't have. We didn't like gold-plate it or anything, but we'd gone really deep into that rabbit hole. We built out a lot of stuff without getting a whole lot of validation or a whole lot of money from anybody. And so request metrics failed because of that. It did not work out. But behind every overnight success story are years of trying and failing. And so that doesn't mean we're going to quit. We learn from our mistakes and we're getting up and trying again. So what are we doing? What's different this time? What am I going to learn from this? Well, one, I'm going to go talk to people. I did talk to people. I talked to lots of people about websites and web applications and user experience and what sort of things they struggled with. And I saw this common pattern. which was web performance is kind of hard. I had a little bit of proof, like tangible proof. Like, it's not like we didn't get any signups for request metrics. We had a few, just not enough. There's this concept in startup land called the slow SaaS ramp of death. It's from the CEO of Constant Contact in one of her, like a TED Talk or something. But it's like your growth is up and to the right. It's just very slow. And so like, it's not zero. You don't just want to quit because you're not making any money. You're making a little money, just not enough to warrant the huge effort and time and people that you're pouring into it. And we were very much on that with the old one. And so I had some data from them, is that the people in the platform would spend the vast majority of their time analyzing performance problems over anything else. Turns out developers don't know how to make websites fast very often. And this problem got a lot more important recently due to a big market thing, is Google came up with this set of metrics to try to objectively measure whether a site is fast. A set of metrics that you could compare this site versus this site, regardless of technology stack and framework, and say this site is faster than that one. And then they also said, here's what scores you need to get for us, for Google, to say your site is fast or slow. If you're not familiar with this and you have a publicly facing site, this is definitely something you should research more. Then Google did something crazy. They made these part of PageRank, the algorithm that figures out search. And now suddenly, website operators all over the world cared a whole lot about web performance. Now this was their lifeblood of their business. The companies that care about SEO the most, e-commerce companies, media companies, publishers, who live and die by what rank they are in the search results, they now cared a whole lot about web performance. And so that's what we learned, is like, this is a hard problem, and there's a strong market force that's putting financial pressure on companies to pay for it. So there's a budget for it. So we're trying again. Trying to fix that problem of actually solving a problem where there's a customer who has a budget to solve this problem. We're focusing on these core performance problems and speaking specifically to that niche of engineers that are facing those challenges. We're super early. We just formally launched this thing last week. But so far, it's been amazing. We released a new pricing model with a free tier, which is huge because nobody else in our market really does that. And it's been amazing. And that's because we learned this really important lesson. If you're going to build something, you've got to build something that solves a problem for a real person. Because if you're not, you're just building a tech demo. So if that sounds like you, and you have those sort of problems, I'd love to chat more. Here's where you can get information, or you go to requestmetrics.com. And that was my sixth story. So let's wrap this up. The definition of success has shifted and expanded for me throughout my career. It used to mean prestige, then it meant independence, then time, and it's probably going to change some more times. And that definition, yours, doesn't need to be the same as mine, because whatever you want is whatever you want. But you should think about what that is that you want to make you happy, because you don't have as much time as you think. Get out there and do what you want today, because it might be the last day that you have. And don't worry if you don't know what you're doing. None of us know what we're doing when we start. Everybody's just making it up as they go. But remember, no matter what you do or what you want out of life, you need to build relationships with the people around you. They pay dividends that you could never imagine when it happens. If you choose to go down the entrepreneurial path, like I did, there's lots of pitfalls that you're going to hit. But you won't hit any of them until you ship something. So stop over-engineering, and if you're not embarrassed of it, you waited too long to ship. And make sure to leverage those relationships and get people by your side when you do it, because you shouldn't do it alone. Oh, and make sure to get off your computer and go talk to real people. Understand the real problems, or you're just building tech for fun. It's way more satisfying to build something that people use, and you get some sweet guacamole money for your trouble. Thank you very much. if you'd like to chat more, not on a recording, or grab stickers or contact information, I have a bunch of stuff up there. Thank you so much for coming.